Most people believe mental illness is something doctors manage and families endure. Sounds reasonable, but it creates a serious problem. Because when care becomes control and treatment becomes containment, we stop asking what produces suffering in the first place, and the institution starts to look less like rescue and more like rehearsal. Drugs and Addiction, an Anarchist Perspective, Dickie Dredd. And we're still on Chapter 2, The Childhood of Fog, and this is part 19 of the video series. Section 17, The Domestic Asylum. The house was my first institution. Long before I entered a classroom or clinic, I understood authority, the shifting mood of those in charge, the unspoken rules, the fine line between reward and punishment. Home taught me how to monitor tone, anticipate crisis, and survive through observation. If one flew into the cuckoo's nest told the story of my later revolt against control, the rehearsal took place here. The kitchen as ward, my bedroom as solitary confinement, my mother as both patient and warden. She moved in and out of hospitals like someone caught between dimensions. Each discharge felt like parole, hopeful at first, then tense as the old patterns crept back in. Sometimes she brought strange men home from pubs or clinics, older drinkers who spoke too loudly or stared too long. I'd hide in my room and listen to the clatter of bottles, the laughter that wasn't funny, and the confessions that weren't asked for. They were her visitors from the underworld, ghosts who recognised one of their own. My father barely mentioned it. When she left him for another man, then came back, he absorbed the event like weather. Endurance was his duty. His mantra to us, repeated almost daily, was, "Mummy's ill." It was his only excuse, and I think he actually believed it. To a child, that normalised madness. Rules were arbitrary, sentences unpredictable. A smile might buy a reprieve, a question could provoke fury. In that uncertainty lay my first education in institutional logic. Authority without explanation. Foucault described the asylum as society's mirror, where deviation is managed rather than understood. Our house followed the same rulebook. Compliance was safety, curiosity, danger. I learnt to blend in, to be the model inmate, attentive, polite, invisible. And yet I was always the observer, the chronicler in training. I watched my mother's eyes glaze as the drink took hold, saw her brief serenity curdle into rage, then collapse into apology. I saw my father's silence hardened into habit, his decency mistaken for detachment. I pitied and simultaneously hated them before I understood them. They weren't villains, they were casualties of their conditioning, products of a generation medicated by respectability and anaesthetised by fear. Herman wrote that trauma demands to be repeated when it cannot be spoken. They repeated because no one had taught them the language of repair. The domestic asylum prepared me perfectly for the wider one. School, with its bells, detentions and hierarchies, was only a change of uniform. Later, when I came face to face with psychiatry, its diagnoses, its hierarchies, its faith in compliance, I recognised the tone at once. It was the voice of my mother's doctors, the ones who prescribed order and called it care. Psychiatry, at its worst, resembles the household that makes it necessary. Control, disguised as compassion. My distrust of state power began there. Watching my mother disappear into institutions that promised cure but delivered containment made me wary of the system that sells salvation. Marte reminds us that the attempt to escape pain without understanding it only deepens suffering. That was true of her treatment and of the culture that endorsed it. When politicians preach mental health reform or drug recovery, I still hear the echo of that living room, tidy, managed, despairing. And yet empathy remains. My mother's addiction and my father's quietness weren't moral failings. They were inherited defence mechanisms. They did what they were trained to do: suppress, survive, smile. Bruce Perry's work shows that trauma repeats until compassion interrupts. Understanding that freed me from blame. What began as anger matured into recognition. They too were inmates, just older and less aware of the rules. Looking back, the house feels less like a prison and more like a laboratory where the chemistry of control was refined. Every slammed door, every whispered apology was data. I didn't know it then, but I was already gathering material for a lifetime's experiment, studying how obedience mutates into illness, how care becomes custody. The anarchist in me wasn't born in the fields or the festivals. He emerged quietly in that domestic ward, notebook in hand, already suspicious of the word normal. But no one lives forever inside their first institution. At some point, the door creeps open and the outside world rushes in, loud, bright and lawless. And in the next section, we'll start talking about me getting out of that asylum in section 18, which is called The Discovery of Outside Worlds.